Hey, Econ. I wanted to teach this lesson today, so in case you missed the Zoom class, you can jump on and watch this lesson instead, and it will help you out a little bit with everything that we got going on today. So just wanted to go through this with you. All right, so we talked last week about this federal budget and how there were times when we spent more money as a federal government than we actually brought in taxes, okay? And we talked about how sometimes we have to do that, for example, during the Great Depression or during a time of war. Or right now, we talked about how the line is going to dip way down for 2020 because we've got to spend this money to get the economy running. But I want to talk a little bit more about where that actual money comes from. And then I wanted to also explain how that's going to link into what we're about to do next, which is to work on our own personal budgets and our own spending and how credit cards work and that kind of thing. So first, let me go over federal income. So they spend the money, but the federal government also gets money. So how do they get money? So two of the main ways that they get money are through federal taxes, and we get taxes from two different places. You get taxes from individual income tax, so we pay that whenever we have a job, right? Or we get it through payroll taxes. And the money that's given for Social Security and Medicare comes from that income tax, okay? Let me just switch sides here. Maybe this will help out. So that's how we get that money. So when you have income taxes and payroll taxes, that equals up to about 80% of the federal taxes. So 80% of our money is coming from those places. But the federal government also gets money from a few other things. So they get money from corporate income tax. So corporations have to pay tax on the money that they make, so we get money that way. Excise tax on things that are special like alcohol, gasoline, tobacco, those kinds of things we charge extra money for. And then that money also helps to offset our taxes. And then, of course, in the state and gift tax. So if you have like a lot of extra money, if you get something, hold on a second, if you sell a house or inherit a house, you have to pay real estate or estate taxes on those things. And so we also get money from that, okay? So for example, I just sold my house. I have to pay taxes on that because it's technically considered this income. And so because of that, I just paid the government $30,000, right? Because I sold my house and that was extra income. So our government's making money off of that, okay? But we still have this federal debt. So as of April 13th, 2020, our debt is at $24.22 trillion, okay? So the national debt in the U.S. has increased about 21% since President Trump took office in January of 2017. But just to put it in perspective, when you have something like a financial crisis, and our debt will definitely go way up with this coronavirus. So his 21% looks pretty good at the moment, but that's going to jump and skyrocket big time when we talk about adding in the coronavirus issue with it, okay? But under President Obama's 8 years, the national debt increased 100%. It went from 10 trillion to 20 trillion. And although the economic stimulus package that he had to do in 2008, when we bailed out all the banks, we bailed out the car industry, like we bailed out a lot of people, that is what made up the biggest chunk of that. Those bank bailouts were gigantic, okay? And they gave those companies so much money, and that's why we ended up with so much more debt because of that. So I want you to understand, it's not necessarily just the president, it can be the conditions that which with he is in, okay? So when you're trying to bail out those corporations, that changes definitely how much money. So right now they're talking about making the second stimulus package that would be passed in Congress, and they're working on it right now. I just saw in the news a few minutes ago, Mitch McConnell in the Senate said they were close to a deal. That deal is going to bail out more businesses. It's going to bail out more of the airlines. It's going to bail out more of those industries that were really crippled in this. And if it passes, will also give people personal money. So they're talking about anybody who got a stimulus check would now not only get that stimulus check of that $1,200, but they're looking at trying to expand that to $2,000 per person for an extended amount of time. So $2,000 a month for an extended amount of time, okay? And so we'll see what happens with that. But if that happens, this 21% under Trump is going to skyrocket. That will go way up. We will jump this probably way more than that 20% because you don't just magically have that money. So when we're doing this, we are actually borrowing money to make our budget because we're already in deficit, meaning we don't have enough to pay the government bills, okay? So let's talk about that debt just a little bit. So the U.S. government has been in debt since basically 1790, which is the Revolutionary War. That's when we started being in debt. So it's not something that's old. We've been in debt for a while. That's kind of how we operate, okay? Since then, it's been fueled by more war, economic recession, and inflation. So basically, it constantly is going to change based on whatever kind of situations we're in, okay? So it's gone up repeatedly. It's not, we've had some periods where we've paid it down, but basically, we've had a lot of that debt since 1790. So all the way back to the Revolutionary War, we've got debt from 1790. Okay. So political disagreements on debt is what that should say, have led to gridlock. So a lot of times in Congress, when they're trying to debate how do we balance this, how do we go into more debt to do programs like to pay schools more, or to handle healthcare issues, or to go to war? Do we go into debt? And that's often when they're trying to decide what the budget's going to look like, are they going to approve it? And appropriation means where does the money go? When they're deciding where the money goes, if they're going to approve a budget, often they get gridlocked and they'll simply shut down. So when we've had a budget problem in this country, often then when the government's trying to approve it, they will go into a shutdown mode. And that's happened a few times, right, in our recent history. So, for example, the president has to ask Congress to increase the debt. So in September of 2013, the debt ceiling basically means the limit of what we're going to have as our debt. We had in September 2013, just an example, it was 16 trillion. And the government said, okay, listen, we need to increase this. But they could not agree on whether they should increase that debt from 16 trillion. And obviously now, when I showed you those numbers, they make up, 24 trillion. So way over that. But anyway, every time we hire that debt, there has to be an agreement with Congress. And often they get gridlocked in that. And then they end just having the government shut down because they can't agree to how to solve it. All right, so the U.S. debt, typically it is accepted by the public. So there's not really like a rebellion saying, okay, we don't want to have debt. We do. We say, okay, that's fine, we can have debt. If the proceeds of that debt, meaning if that extra money we acquire in debt is going to grow the economy, then we're good. So an example would be like these stimulus checks of $1,200 that were sent out. People are usually okay with increasing the debt if it's actually going to benefit public people, right? So if I'm going to actually get money from the government, then somehow I'm okay with increasing that debt. But that debt is so ominous and abstract to us. I don't think we truly understand it, and it does impact our personal debt. So we'll talk about that later. But that is going to impact us down the road. So people should pay actually more attention to it. If it's about war, if it's going to be war that is going to cost us money, usually we're a little more excited to go to pay for this if it's for war. And if it's to bail out banks and large industry. So right now, obviously nobody wants all the airlines to fail. Nobody wants banks to fail. So when we've bailed out banks or we're bailing out the airline industry, or they're talking about bailing out the cruise industry, do we have to bail those out? Well, airline industry, for example, is pretty essential. So can we not just bail out the airline industry? I think we need the airline industry. So if we are willing to go into debt, if we know that it's something that's actually going to benefit us. Now, here's where the switch comes. Because not everybody's benefiting necessarily from that, then people get freaked out. If the debt is raised to simply fund public consumption, we'll talk about that in a second, then the support goes down, okay? So public consumption looks like this. Public consumption means if I'm going to increase Medicare costs, if I'm going to increase Social Security, if I'm going to increase Medicaid, and if I'm going to increase benefits for lower income citizens, then people start to go, whoa, whoa, whoa. So at certain levels, people are okay if some people get a stimulus check because it's going to go up. So right now, I have some wealthier friends who make way more money than what was needed to get a stimulus check. So they did not get a stimulus money, okay? But as a teacher, I don't make as much, so I did get a stimulus check. So some of my friends have been saying, well, you got your $1,200, but you don't need any more money than that. So it gets tricky because they don't want to see us get more if we're at lower income because those higher income people actually end up paying more taxes. And we'll talk about how they get that money back in a second. But people get really scary about this because they say, if we're just giving people money for Medicare, if we're just giving people money for Medicaid, if we're just helping people out with this basic stuff, like, that's not fair to the rest of us. And this comes down to basically whether you think people deserve that. So if a situation is that a family doesn't have enough money and does need like SNAP food benefits or Section 8 housing, are we willing as a society to help those people out? Now, I think our class is a little bit different. Some of us have experienced that firsthand, so we're actually a little more willing to say, yeah, we need that because families can't freaking exist without that. How do we go on if they can't exist? We need it. But if you were to switch yourself into some other part of the country, perhaps where they were more wealthy, or whether they didn't have inner city situations, or they didn't have as much poverty maybe as there is in the Bay Area, for example, they may not understand that. If they didn't see a bunch of homeless people on the street constantly like we do, they may not see that you need homeless shelters and benefits for those people. Or if they weren't in a situation where kids don't have a choice. So if I'm born into a family that doesn't have a lot of money, or my parents don't work or aren't capable of working, or have a physical or mental disability that prevents from them working, is that fair then that that kid can't get medical care, or that kid can't get benefits? And some people, then the argument comes down to, well, too bad. Like, their parents need to get their crap together. And we all know, obviously, that's not the answer, and that doesn't actually work, right? So for some people, yeah, it is a matter of going and getting a job. But for other people, that's really not the whole picture, the whole situation. And for kids that are stuck in those situations, it's definitely not, right? So, but it's a balance, because when we go into debt for public consumption, everything else is going to go up. So we have to decide as a society whether we're willing to help people out or if we're not. Do we feel like having benefits for low-income citizens is worth it, or is it not? Do I want my money going to a hospital where people don't have health insurance? That comes down to these like personal moral feelings about whether you think we should be helping other people or not. And financially, yes, our country does this, but it is a real debate about whether they should get that money or how much they get that money. And I can tell you right now that if we send out this $2,000 a month to everybody who got these stimulus checks, and we increase that money from that $1,200 to $2,000 and now make it every month, there will be quite a debate in this country about whether people should be doing that or not. And part of why they're saying that we do need that money is because they were shocked. I don't know why they were shocked, but the government was surprised that people were going to spend that $1,200 paying bills. In the past, there has been stimulus checks that have been sent out to try to get people to go buy things. So like buy more stuff, and then that will like increase our profits in America. But that's not really working the same way this time, because people actually don't have jobs. So they're using that $1,200 to actually pay bills. So it's not stimulating the economy in the same way it normally does, meaning restaurants, shopping centers, and that kind of thing, making the money, and suddenly lots of people getting wealthy. The money's being concentrated on bills. And so they're talking about now, well, what happens if we actually give people $2,000 a month? And some people then say, well, if I had that, I can pay off debts and then be better off financially. So it's a lot of complicated issues about whether we actually should be using U.S. debt to help that situation out, or should we not? Is it essential? If we don't give people money right now, where are we at in another 6 months? Will there be more homeless people? Will the lines at food banks be even longer? And they're already crazy long right now. So it really does come down to sometimes looking at this debt and trying to say, well, if we go into debt, am I okay with that because I want to help people out? And a large part of America says the opposite to that. No, I'm not giving handouts. We shouldn't just be helping people out. Okay. So you really have to this is a complicated issue, and it's very heated about whether we should be putting more money into this or not, which is people like Bernie Sanders' plan. People don't want to give everybody health care. People don't want to make college free because people feel like, well, if you're getting a handout, shouldn't I get a handout? And then the other side of that is, well, but there have been times in America when it was a lot easier, it was a lot cheaper. So I didn't get my college paid for. I would be a little frustrated if you guys suddenly get college for free. But I also understand that college was more affordable when I was in college versus you going to college now. And if I want an educated workforce, if I want people to be educated, if I want people to have their own jobs and passions so that they're not using as many public services, then I have to say, okay, yeah, college is out of control and I want you to have free college. So it is this balance, right? Yes, it seems unfair if one group gets a handout and the other group doesn't get a handout, but I think it comes down to whether we want public good and how do you empower people. So if I know you can go to college, you are empowered to lead your own life better. But if I don't have money for you to go to college, where does that leave you? So it's a real wrestling point for people because everybody is so trained in this country. Well, what about me? What about me? What about me? And so it gets really tricky for us to sometimes say, well, how much is everybody getting? And is that really fair? And do some people need that money versus some people who don't need that money, right? Okay, so can we reduce the debt? So the debt can only be reduced through 5 ways. It can be reduced through increased taxes. It can be through reduced spending, by debt restructuring. So we move the debt around. You sell debt to basic different banks, and those banks are going to charge you different amounts of interest. Monetizing the debt. So we actually sell off part of our debt to smaller organizations or corporations who buy it and then use it. And then are outright defaulting, like we can't pay you. Okay, so there's really only a few ways that we can actually reduce the debt. So if we have to pay off our debt, where does the U.S. government actually borrow money from? So the main way that it does this is it sells treasury marketable securities, or a bond is what they call it, right? It's the best way to explain it is just a bond. So they'll sell this bond and it'll basically say, if you give us, let's say you're a big bank and you're going to buy this bond, you're going to give me $1 million now. And if you give us $1 million now, in 10 years, we'll pay you back $1,200,000 or $1.2 million. Okay. So I'm going to give you back extra, which is basically this interest. Okay. And so other federal government agencies might buy this if they have extra money that they don't need. Private individuals, larger banks, businesses, state and local governments, foreign people, businesses and governments are going to buy up our debt too. That's why we owe a lot of money to China, right? Like they give us money and then they say, okay, you pay us back with interest. So how does that work? So those people, corporations, businesses, whatever we're talking about, countries, lend the government money, and then that's so it can pay the bills. Okay, so we're borrowing money to pay the bills. It would be the same as if I need money to pay off a bill, let's say my electric bill, and I borrow money from you, and you give me that money, and I pay my electric bill, so good, now I'm done. But I also say to you, hey, if you give me money now, then in September I'll give you back that money plus some. So let's say I borrow $100, and in, let's say, September, I'm going to give you back $120. So you're going to make $20. You don't care because you have an extra 100 right now you can give me. You'll make a little extra. You're good to go with that. Okay, but we're talking about billions of dollars, right? Over time, the government gives that money back plus a little bit extra to those people. And that extra money is basically interest, right? So that extra money is the interest that they're going to pay. And that's how those people that we've borrowed money from make that money. Then the government increases taxes to the American people, and then we can pay back that debt. So then that last part is then our taxes go up. Okay, so you can't miss this last part. Like, if I can put this up higher here, the government taxes the American people more to pay back that debt. So the part here that gets tricky is that we then have to pay back that debt. So we can't just sit here and go, okay, well, it doesn't matter if we go into debt. It doesn't matter if we help all these people out, because ultimately my taxes go up. So then that affects what I'm having to pay. Okay, so it does actually affect my personal finances when we go into debt. And they'll give estimates like the percentage of the debt that is each individual's in America. If we divided up those trillions of dollars, that 24 trillion, we're like up to like $75,000 right now. That's my share of that I'm gonna have to pay off. So my tax money goes up. My taxes go up for other things too, like schools or roads or whatever we're gonna improve in a city, right? But my taxes are also gonna go up federally because I have to figure out how we're going to pay for this debt. So we've borrowed money, we've sold it off in the form of bonds. You buy this bond. the bond is my promise that I'll pay this back plus extra. And people are buying those up from us, and then that's how the government's getting their money. Okay, so it's kind of tricky, but I wanted to explain it, and then hopefully that helps out to explain it a little bit. Take notes on this so that you have these, and we'll begin working on our personal side of things tomorrow. Okay, all right, hopefully you'll join me for class tomorrow. Okay, bye.